Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we are talking change in World of Warcraft, and in particular, Battle for Azeroth. Because WoW's living, progressing, and evolving world is something that I've been pondering a lot recently, and something which Blizzard seem determined to double down on in the next expansion. And when I say change, I don't mean the everyday tweaks and upgrades that are part of day-to-day life, like your class was good and then your class was trash and now it's still trash, but look, cool new spell effects. Or your race was the most badass and then your race was even more the most badass, and hey look, we just made it even more badass. Basically, Lok'tar or Gar go home, right? No, I'm talking about those sweeping, grand, and very obvious examples of WoW's open-ended narrative facilitating striking and mostly permanent changes in the actual game world itself. Something like, oh hey, we just dropped a bomb on Theramore, so now Theramore isn't in the game anymore. Or look, this big guy rammed his sword into the planet, so now there's a massive sword in the planet. World and lore events that are physically represented in the game world and quite literally leave their mark. And the reason I moved to create a whole video essay on this subject is because, and this is a possible spoiler for Battle for Azeroth, surrounded by actual spoilers for Battle for Azeroth, so take the appropriate action now, Datamined broadcast text from the BFA Alpha suggests that such a change may well be on its way for the new Alliance faction capital in Kul Tiras, Boralus. And you know Boralus, right? It's the new centre of untexted ships, scoundrels, bears, Asmongolds, cool-ass trenchcoats, and Jaina Proudmoore's mum. Basically, it's the aesthetic I've been waiting for in WoW since day one, and I know I am not alone in being extremely excited to wander around this vibrant, alive, majestic city, and basically what I'm saying is, you may want to make the most of it. Because plot points and dialogue from an as yet unplayable BFA dungeon suggest that this bustling port town might be about to get hit pretty hard, and in ways that will change the face of the town before you've even had a chance to properly call it home. So join us as we take a look at the supposed upcoming action in Jaina's hometown and ask, is Boralus really doomed? Okay? Go, 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 go. One of the biggest challenges of a perpetual online universe is how it is allowed to evolve. How much change can a player really affect on the world around them? And the way in which developers choose to meet this challenge can make or break an online game. One of the most thrilling times I've ever known in gaming was back in my EVE Online games and the famous Jita attack of 2011. Thousands of EVE players, unhappy at, amongst other things, the introduction of a new cash shop, showed their displeasure by bombarding the central player hub, Jita, relentlessly for a week. Thousands of ships mercilessly firing upon this indestructible structure was exciting in itself, but even more seismic was the way the developer CCP responded. By backtracking on their plans for the shop, but also changing the in-game model for Jita to show damage from the protest. The players' actions hadn't just changed the game in real life, they'd left a permanent memorial in-game too. The Jita protest, in conclusion, remains one of the defining moments in MMO history for these reasons, and is the gold standard in player agency and ownership within virtual game worlds. New EVE players might wonder why Jita is all blown to bits, and older players can tell them the story. Many will even be able to say, I was there. Obviously, World of Warcraft is a very different game to EVE Online. Whereas EVE is arguably the ultimate sandbox MMO, its universe existing essentially to facilitate the actions of its players who create their own narratives, or at least it was when I last played it. WoW is an example of a more theme park approach to narrative. WoW players will never have the in-game freedom that EVE players have, so Blizzard's approach of having players contribute towards world changes, even if those changes are ultimately predetermined, would appear to be their way of addressing that. So Varian and Vol'jin died at a battle, but it was a battle that we fought alongside them, even if we never had the option of fighting well enough to save them. And then Stormwind finally got rebuilt into a military grave for the fallen of that very battle. Argus appeared in the sky because we bopped through the Broken Isles to recover the Pillars of Creation, which we used to gain access to the Tomb of Sargeras, at the end of which we went through a portal to kill Jaden's disco ship and needed to escape the ensuing explosion. And also Gaziladan is a dick. A big sword appeared in the planet because we went to Antorus and defeated the Legion, and also a Titan, and then released another Titan who we then had to go to the Pantheon to fight so that all the other Titans could zap Sargeras' vape smoke away and stop him doing much worse than just plunging his massive weapon into us. It's consequence without specific agency. So whereas we can't change world events, we are at least involved in them happening. And that is effective, because instead of the Silithus sword just being a random, if very impressive change like the Cataclysm, it instead works as a monument to things that we have done, adventures we have had, and that works for me. And Blizzard are continuing this approach with Battle for Azeroth. Again, there are massive changes coming to the very landscape of this world, but but again, we will be present and active every step of the way. So Teldrassil is going to burn down, and the Night Elves will have to flee from the Eastern Kingdoms. Players will be there alongside Sylvanas as it happens, and will doubtless have a hand in the events unfolding, even if, again, there is nothing we can do to ultimately change that outcome. Lordaeron will fall to the Alliance, and players will play through a scenario to live through that event. They will save lives on their own side and have an impact, even though the outcome, the Alliance taking Lordaeron, has to always remain the same. But even without that agency, in years to come, when Alliance players walk past that city, or Horde players remember the days when Undercity was a thing, they can say, yeah, I fought in that battle. And do not underestimate the importance that has on players' feelings of ownership on a game world compared to, oh, a dragon did it. Which brings us to Boralus. Boralus is the new Alliance capital in Battle for Azeroth, but already it seems a cut above the normal player hub. It's got everything you'd expect from a center of player operations on a new continent. Vendors, trainers, NPC quest givers, mission table, yeah, sorry. But whereas most previous capitals have been content to just have that stuff all inside a cool building or area, or maybe even a whole floating city, Boralus goes beyond the functional. Built around the player hub itself is a whole independent city, which even at this very early stage of the alpha is a beautifully realized and vibrant place where NPCs work, business happens, interactions take place, and life just exists. And also, the player does not have free reign of this place. This is not a capital as safe zone. There are parts of town it's dangerous to wander through, and much of the zone's storyline happens within the city limits rather than it just being a staging post where you pick up quests that take you to other areas. You feel like a visitor in Boralus rather than it being a place you own. Now, of course, this might all change in the alpha because apart from anything, Boralus isn't complete. It's lacking assets, half of it isn't properly connected, and there's even a whole section of the city which is pretty much empty. But there could be a reason behind that emptiness, because there's reason to believe, okay, not believe, that's the wrong word, there's reason to speculate that even at launch, Boralus might be in a temporary state, that there might be a disaster heading this city's way that will have a Vale of Eternal Blossoms style impact on the town and its people. An event that in true WoW style we won't be able to stop, but we will get to play through, and which will make up the latest in a growing list of player capitals we see desecrated in Battle for Azeroth. Let's take a look at Boralus's potential future. So although we're not going into too much of the actual story leading up to this, what follows is obviously spoiler-tastic and focuses on one Lady Priscilla Ashvane and the climax of her particular story, which reveals this lady is in league with Queen Azshara and launches all her newfound tentacly might upon our new favourite city, which is the setting for the Battle for Azeroth dungeon, the Siege of Boralus. Now, there is currently no map for this dungeon, but it seems fair to assume that it will use part of the actual area of the city itself, which might explain why that one corner of the city in the open world is totally empty. But you know, we don't actually know that. All we do know are the names of the bosses, including a giant who smashes buildings, and the final boss who used to be Lady Ashvane herself, but is now simply Kraken. But you know, still with Lady Ashvane's abilities. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions there. And our old friend Datamined broadcast text. And yes, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but Taliesin, paying attention to Datamined broadcast text is like sending Bill Cosby on the alcohol run before a party. The end result is almost certainly going to be very different from what you first imagined, and you'd be right. It's pointless treating this information as any kind of gospel, even the rubbish gospels that no one's ever read, because things can and do change. But even with that being said, this stuff doesn't come from nowhere, so let's look at what we've got. The first set of lines appear to be on the Horde side. Siege of Boralus is currently an Alliance leveling dungeon that opens up to Horde players at level 120, and it seems like rather than just donning Alliance disguises or whatever, the Horde will have an entire different story to play through the instance. Instead of wanting to save Boralus, they just want to nab Lady Ashvane's snazzy Azurite weapons. Remember, the primary objective is recovering Lady Ashvane's weapons. See, I told you. Ha! Look at them scatter. Without their leadership, these humans are worthless. But more important to this video is what they say about the state of the town. Looks as if Boralus is already in its death throes. So it would seem that in the course of the battle, at least one part of the city is taking a bit of a beating, but that hardly means that we're looking at the next Theramore here, does it? Well, the most interesting speech actually comes at the end of the dungeon. Why would I save a failure, Ashvane? Now again, we don't know who's saying this, but it's a pretty safe bet that it's Queen Azshara herself. It seems at this point like we have defeated Lady Ashvane. She's been all like, oh, Queen Azshara, it's me, your faithful servant again, please help me. And Azshara is having none of it. She goes on to say, I see now that entertaining her delusions of taking this city were a waste of my efforts, a mistake I will now gladly rectify. You will serve as an example of what happens to those who invoke my wrath. Let Azeroth tremble at my power. And then someone else says, Lord Admiral, we must get you to safety now. A massive massive tidal wave is approaching the city. And just in case there's any ambiguity about that, the Horde dialogue confirms it. A tidal wave is rushing towards the city. It's time to leave Boralus to its fate. So this dungeon would appear to conclude before this tidal wave happens, because the Horde are already out of there, which means it all ends with Boralus on the brink of unnatural disaster. Basically, it's not looking good for our new favourite pirate town. Now, if you want my honest prediction here, there's going to be a cutscene featuring all of this, and that cutscene will end with Bondage Jaina leaping onto the battlements, repelling the wave with her awesome ice magic, and saving the day, which would have the double win of Boralus not being totally destroyed, and Jaina's mum realising that actually she's probably not that bad after all, and in fact probably quite useful to have around. But it does also seem logical to speculate that the upshot of all of this is indeed a town taking a tidal wave to the face. And again, in video game world, getting hit by a tidal wave doesn't have to mean the city gets destroyed or damaged at all, but at the same time, why would you bother to include Azshara appearing, magicking up the thing, and landing it all on Boralus, all after the playable action of the instance is over, if you weren't going to then show the consequences of that in-game? To me, it seems pretty likely that if this broadcast text is even halfway accurate, then we could well be looking at an in-game change to this Alliance capital, after pretty much no time at all into the expansion. Because this isn't a leveling dungeon for the Alliance, don't forget. This change wouldn't even be something you'd have to wait till max level to effect. So with that in mind, what kind of destruction could we potentially be looking at here? Well, my thoughts are drawn back to that essentially empty corner of Boralus. I kind of feel like if Blizzard really is going to wreck an unutilized district of the city would be easier to design and less difficult to phase than a rework of the entire capital. So maybe we'll see some of those walls destroyed by the wave, a couple of ships wrecked in the docks, fish and water everywhere, maybe a shark flopping around on the land, citizens beginning to rebuild and repair, or mourning friends and loved ones who didn't survive the attack. There could be new gangs springing up to loot damaged buildings and take advantage of the chaos, gangs that we'll have to take out in new missions. The changes don't have to be Cataclysm level to still have a strong narrative impact. Here is a city we were based in and moving around, an independent kingdom untouched by outside events, and now part of that city is destroyed. Another cool, real-time game world evolution, and another reminder that this is a real war with real consequences, a war that Kul Tiras is now a part of whether they like it or not. Dalaran and Undercity are one thing, but if even your new faction capital isn't safe from the encroaching darkness, then that really does help raise the stakes from a gameplay point of view. Of course, what would be even more dramatic is if we had any sort of power to stop that disaster from happening, but Blizzard have proven that they can still deliver at least a sense of that agency, even if it is a false sense, that is really effective. And whatever their plans for Boralus, and indeed the rest of the world next expansion, I'm excited to see how Azeroth might change next. So what do you think, guys? From what you've seen, do you reckon Boralus is going to be the next victim of a Blizzard destruction event? Do you think we'll be seeing permanent changes to the city so soon after launch? Do you think anything will happen at all, or do you believe, like me, that Jaina will probably pop up and save the day? And what are your thoughts on the way that Blizzard enables player agency in-game? Do you feel like your character is having a genuine impact on world events, or do you feel trapped in whatever story they decide to tell? Let us know in the comments below, and thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this video, don't thank us, thank our patrons who give their actual real-life money to make these videos happen. It's because of them that we're able to have a weekly news show and these essay-type videos side by side, so thank you guys, you really are the best. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Nagura. No, my name is Taliesin from me and Evitel. Until next time, cheerio.